Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Barnyard Broadcast, which is a part of the Penn State Extension Livestock team. Today, on this episode, we will be chatting a little bit more about forages and pasture management. As always, I have three guests on the podcast with me today: Gabe Francisco, Aaron Kaprinka, and Justin Brackenrich. If you want to learn a little bit more about them, you can go ahead and visit their bios in the show notes below. And without further ado, let's get into the conversation. All right, so hello everybody. My name is Maddie Horkler. I am your host. We're going to go around and we're going to start some introductions. So Justin, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Justin Brackenrich. I'm an agronomy educator with Penn State Extension, and I work in the southwest corner of the state.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Kaprinka. I am also an agronomy educator with Penn State Extension in the northwest part of the state.
Hi, my name is Gabriel Francisco, and I am a livestock and grazing specialist for Southwest Michigan. I also own a little small farm in Pawpaw as well.
Sweet. Well, thank you guys all for coming on today. So we are going to get right into it. We're going to talk a little bit about forages and just pasture in general. So just to start off, what is sort of a basic pasture mix that you would recommend for each of the species or ruminants, or however you all want to break that up?
I have some recommendations for Michigan. So, my first thing I would tell people is that pasture recommendations can be highly variable depending on the region of the country that you're in. So, some of my recommendations might not be the best for Pennsylvania, definitely would not be good for South Texas. So, honestly, if you can get a hold of your local extension agency, they're probably going to have some of the best forage advice for your region of your state, even um, and your state itself. But when I talk about forage mixes for livestock, I tend to get into a conversation. It's called digestive morphology with my producers, where I talk about the actual shape of the mouth of these animals and how they eat the pasture or the area that they're at. And so when we're designing pasture mixes for my producers, I ask them what's their main livestock that they're moving through that land, right? Because that's obviously what that's the goal of their farm. And so if they're having something like cattle, we definitely want more taller grasses, something that they can actually wrap their tongues around and grab that sward, all that big group of grass all at once. When we have sheep, we like the taller grasses, but we don't want them too tall because it can start cutting into their eyes. Um, and they also like a little bit of more broadleaf plants in there. So we want to incorporate a little bit more legume. I talk a lot about what is your farm naturally giving you. Some of the best forage can actually be something that's just in your seed bed that you never even planted yourself. And then when we have goats on the property, again, these are a whole different type of grazing, which we actually call it browsing, where they're going to look for more woody plants, more of the broadleaves, and they're going to target those plants rather than the grasses. Now, that's not saying you can't teach cows how to eat bushes or goats how to eat grass. It's just naturally what are they going to go out and select. So cattle is a very grass heavy, a little bit of legume in there. When we get into sheep, it's a lot of grass, but a little bit more of the broadleaf, something like even lamb's quarters in there. And then when we get into goats, I tend to prescribe more of where can we put some more brushy species, some more kind of rougher stuff in there for them.
So I heard him say the word lamb's quarter, and it just like sends a shiver up my back, right? Of where we're at in Pennsylvania, that's one of the weeds that we fight with all of our row cropping and stuff. And I imagine I would be short-lived for this job if I start recommending lamb's quarter. I'm just kidding. You know, mine's a little bit different, right? Where we're at, I still that we still kind of struggle with some of our rotational versus conventional grazing systems, right? And so, ideally, what we're trying to do is figure out more of that system and how they're going to manage it. The livestock, Gabe did a great job outlining that. But then this question becomes, what's your approach, right? Are you a 3-day move and you rest for 3 weeks? Are you an in May and out in October? And I think that kind of helps me build some of these ideas. And the other part to this that I often kind of work through with people is I can build you a blend. I can help you come up with this. But most of the time, what they're going to do is they're going to pick what's available and what's cost effective, right? And so as I start saying, we need 2 pounds of this and 7 pounds of that and 4 pounds, what happens is they go to their seed dealer and they say, well, I can get you that for $50 more an acre, or I can sell you what's here, right? And so my education focuses more on reading the label, knowing what's there, soil types, right? That agronomy background more so than the animal science is how well drained is it? How shaly is it? How deep is it? What's your shade? And then we start thinking about, we have a lot of tall fescue base with a lot of orchard grass. Brome is becoming very popular in a lot of our mixes to use. I kind of push people away from any of these mixes that say premium, right? When you start getting into premium and you've got Timothy and alfalfa and stuff in it, what we're often doing is perennial ryegrass is another one, right? If we're looking at horses or something like that, so many more sugars there than maybe what we want. But I start kind of saying, well, premium means better, but it also means more management. And so mine's more of a sliding scale to fit those species to what they're doing on their operation and how we can help kind of push that along.
Yeah, so I guess we started talking a little bit about, the different animals and that sort of stuff and kind of regional things. And so I guess I want to dive a little bit deeper into the specific forages. And are there some specific forages that you guys have in mind that help producers reach their goals? So whether that be pasture for rotational grazing, or is it dry hay versus haylage, those sort of stuff. In addition to what you all just said, any other recommendations for those sort of setups?
Yeah, um yeah, that's an interesting question. There is things like I recommend a lot of birds with trefoil in some of my mixes. It can be a little bit more expensive, but if a farmer is wants that protein punch without the bloat risk, that tends to be something I work a lot with. Another one is called Lepidisa. I work a lot with that as well. Um, but some of the more unconventional ones I can talk to some of my farmers about is and so I really got to know what their goal is. What's the problem that's on their farm, right? Are they experiencing a big worm load? Because if they're having a big internal parasite, we can put in a couple of things that might help offset it. The science is still a little shaky on that, but if it's gonna help, well, maybe it'll assist. So something like a chicory in there. Sometimes I do a forage chicory, pumpkins or something in there. Are they losing their pasture in the heat of the summer? If that's a problem, then maybe we need to talk about more warm season forages, right? What is the problem in their goal, right? They've come to me for an advice on something. What do they need the advice on, right? Um, and so if I'm looking at, okay, I got heat, that's when they're losing their pasture, that's when they're losing all this weight from their animals. What can we add in? We can add in something like a pearl millet, right? Something that's going to grow nice and fast in the heat, right? That will hopefully get them sustained through that kind of mid-season slump.
I'm learning two new digestive morphology and worm load. When I start talking to ruminant producers now, they're going to think, where has this guy been and who has he been talking to? Because man, he's a lot smarter than he used to be. Um, and again, it's just like what Gabe says, right? And I think it's across all extensions and all people in ag. We preface everything with "it depends," right? We don't mean to do that, but we can't help it because no two areas are the same. When I start thinking about it, I'm thinking specifically more of the kind of harvested forages versus pasture and stuff. And we start to ask these questions, and a lot of this is knowing what questions to ask to get you there, right? Are you making one cut of hay, barely making a second or third? Are you making one cut and you're letting it grow and then you're grazing it into the fall? Just like Gabe had mentioned, are we struggling through the summer? And a big one for me again is, when was the last time we tested the soils on any of this stuff, right? Is we have to get away from this idea of our pastures or everything we can't do anything else with, but start to understand, when we start to buy some of these varieties are not the same as they used to be a long time ago, right? When we start thinking about like Kentucky 31 or Pennellate or some of these varieties of grasses, they're just like our livestock, right? We've kind of evolved them to need more and take a little bit more maybe attention to get them where they need to go. So I think all of that kind of culminates into this table that we often use a lot within extension, looking at what species of grass are good for the animals. What is the maturity of that grass, right? We see a lot of this with, early and late maturing orchard grasses. That could be a whole podcast on itself. But early and late varieties of grasses, if you want to cut hay in June and not think about it again, then we start to drift into these orchard grasses, maybe some of these early Timothys, some of these bromes, right, that you're getting a very significant first end and losing that on the backside. And again, it's kind of hard to cover all the variants and all the nuance to that. But again, I think we start with, what are your goals? What is your soil type? What is your depth? What is your conditions? And what are your goals on the farm?
This is one of the questions that I would like to know, is that if you're a producer out there and you want to start talking to somebody like you guys, what information should I come with prior so that I can have a intelligent or informative conversation with you guys, that you have your information to tell me what I need, and we're not spending 20 minutes in the beginning figuring out what the problem is.
So I also work with the NRCS very closely. So what do you need when you come and talk to us? I really need to know, what is your main livestock that you want to grow on that farm. I need to know your numbers, and I need to know basically your pasture size. And from that, I can walk you through. Now, I like it when farmers come to me and they say, I don't know much. I'm just trying to figure this out. I'm trying to work this out, because it's just a lot more easier for me to start this conversation with them, right? When somebody comes in and they just know every single detail, they know exactly what they want to do, and I have this all charted out, and I'm gonna move this day and this day and this day. That's a problem. It becomes more of a problem for me, because grazing is highly flux. Like, I don't know. Do you know that in 3 months you're gonna have a drought? No one knows. So we need to so I like to work with farmers who are willing to be flexible and willing to be. So what do you need when you come and talk to me? Um, you need, honestly, you need basically open ears, a willing ability to have a willing conversation, a willingness to listen and to answer some follow-up questions I may have. We have to build a system that's going to work for the farmer as well. So if I come out and I'm telling, I was saying that you have to have the ability to tell me that something's not going to work for you, right? So if I come out and I'm like, okay, every 3 days we move these sheep, and it's got to be 0.2 acres, and that's just how we do it. And that farmer is 80 years old, and they're trying to walk through 2 foot tall grass, that's just not going to work for them, right? They're not going to be able to get out there and do that, right? Or if that farmer's got 5 kids running around and I'm asking them to move 50 sheep, and constantly got to move all this fence, you got to do this, you got to do this. That's not going to work. So we have to build plans for you. So knowing your constraints as well, your ability, is probably also something I would like to have knowledge before I talk to a farmer. Yeah.
So the big one for me, and when I get these phone calls and I start working with producers, 90% of the phone calls start with, my field's no longer performing. What do I need to reseed? Right? Like that is how this question's often brought up. And to me, is again, is this agronomist, not necessarily this animal person. My first thought is, well, why is it not performing? Right? And I tell people, I think if your yield dropped over 1 year, if you went from 3 tons to 1 ton over a year, you would notice it, right? But what we have is this kind of slow downturn and this kind of like hidden hunger that happens in these plants. And one day they wake up and it's been 20 years and they went from 3 tons of hay or this really great grazing now to, I'm supplementing all the time. What happened? Right. And so I think we have to, exactly what Gabe says, we have to have open ears. we have to kind of step back and say, when was the last time you did any fertility management? When was the last time you rotated or did any type of weed management? When was the last time that you actually did seed a non-native type species of grass that wasn't a volunteer white clover or some kind of grass that's coming out of the trees? And I think once we get all that together, right, then we start to see our soils are often in this kind of depleted nutrient status, right? And we use parts per million, so 30 parts per million phosphorus is kind of that optimum. A lot of times I'm seeing them 8 to 12, right? And I'm seeing potassium, which we would like to see at 150 or maybe 200 for hay and grazing. I'm seeing those in the 70s. And so then we have to get them to understand I can tell you a mix and you can seed it, but with those levels of nutrients in your soil, you're not going to be very productive, right? And so what we need to do is start thinking about let's get some phosphorus, let's get some potassium out there. Let's start rotating or mowing or spraying or whatever that looks like. And I can almost guarantee you, then these things start to express at a point they haven't done in years, right? Your clovers start to come back. Some of these other forbs come back. Your grasses show up. And then we've kind of skipped this part of what do I seed, but how do I fix it, right? And I think that's that biggest thing is being willing to come in and take advice and trust the process. Forages are a patient person's game, right? If you want to be resetting every year, switch to corn. But when we're talking about forages, it's an investment 5, 7, 10 years. So we really have to get this in a good structure to make it work.
So I guess you kind of alluded a little bit to my next question, Justin, but you talk about when you're on the phone, people are like, when do I reseed? And sometimes that's not necessarily the case. But when you go out and you look at a pasture, when are some indicators or how do you know when it's time to give up or start over on a pasture or like we just need to.
We never give up, right?
Okay.
Never give up.
True.
No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I was taught, right, and I think this is very different for other people, but start with what's not happening. And again, I'm over kind of repeating this, but start with the fertility, start with the management, because the worst thing that happens is nothing good comes back, but we've got this really nice white canvas that we can start with anything on, right? The worst thing we want to do is go out and buy $1,000 worth of seeds with no idea of what we're really getting into, right? And so that's where a lot of times what I'm kind of hoping for with people is I see them after they've seeded and after it's failed. I wish they would call me 12 months prior to that so that we could step through that and get to that point. But I think that's the big deal to this, right? Is understanding where you want to be and starting 12, 18 months ahead of time to get there.
Mhm. Yeah, I love Justin's approach because it comes from the world of agronomy, and it's wonderful because it actually gives you the real facts of things, right? I tend to give my farmers a lot of naturalist approaches, is what I call them. There's some things that they can observe within their pasture and saying, well, something's not right there. And then we use those to kind of then go to the extension agency and say, hey, I need some actual science data, or they go to the NRCS. So I tend to look a lot, tell my farmers to look a lot at plant communities. Is there a plant that's starting to take over? Is there a reason it's starting to take over? Like one of the classic examples we see a lot in Michigan is horse nettle and broom sedge. When I see those start taking over, I know we have a distinct lack of organic material there, right? Something is wrong right there. We need to test it. We need to kind of figure out what's going on. So plants, they tend to kind of dominate areas that they can just thrive in, right? I'm controlling this area. This is mine. And they'll kind of push out other plants when they do that. So I look at that. What is kind of dominating my pasture right now? What is a controlling factor I can do kind of make it not as comfortable for that plant? I also tend to look at body condition scorings a lot. So this is the size, shape of your animal. Can I see the backbones coming out? If I see really tall grasses and really skinny sheep, right? There's something there that's not right. Is it internal parasite? Is it they're just not eating this grass? Is it something that we need to kind of figure out? So I tend to take a really naturalist approach with my farmers. It kind of helps them ease into that kind of that world. One of the things I've experienced with a lot of farmers in my area is the extension agency, and I love them to death, but this is something they kind of hit you with an impulse of information, almost way too much information for a farmer. Like they're getting books and articles and every little which way article, it's coming from every direction, right? And they just cannot interpret. They can't eat all of that, right? And it's great information. It's got a lot of useful stuff for them, but it's an overload, right? So when we take this naturalist approach and I say, oh, just go out there and look, if you see a weird plant that's just dominating an area, I see it. It's kind of tall, it's really thistly, it's got spikes all over. Well, it's probably old thistle. Well, let's try to figure out what to correct that.
And Gabe, we do some of that. And my concern and where I have problems is broom sedge is our typical indicator, right? Everybody thinks if they've got broom sedge, they've got a pH problem.
Yep.
And so, where I have trouble with that is I say, go out and look for something, and they call back and they're like, well, I got broom sedge. I ordered 2 tons of lime to
That's
the
fair.
acre yesterday,
Right.
right? And
Right.
and so I try to not, I appreciate your approach of like, let's go out and see what's there, right? And one of these questions is, what's the easiest way to know something's going on? Well, you got to get out there and look around, right? You can't do it from your truck. You can't trust your cows to come back and tell you, hey, it's not tasting so good out here. But where we're at, and again, this is anecdotal years worth of data, is they say, well, if I have this problem, I automatically associate that to soil pH, or I automatically associate it to not enough nitrogen. And that's where I try to break some of that cycle is, just like you're saying, you notice something's wrong. Now call me, let's figure out what's causing it. Use those as indicator species, not production guidance species.
Yeah, that's exactly what I call them too. I call them like keystone plants just to give you like an indication of what's going on. But again, it's like if I see it, it's not the oh, I know now I have it, right? It's now we can investigate the test, right? We can go into a little further of a detail and say, now you can go to the extension agency and say, hey, I found a large community of broom sedge on my property in this area. Could we do a soil test in this area to make sure it's a pH problem, organic material matter problem? What's the problem here, right? And so that's kind of what I use a lot, because when I get farmers at the NRCS world, oftentimes they're just saying, what do I do with my farm? It's not producing. What do I do? Okay, now we start. What is the issue? Okay, do you see this happening? Do you see this happening? Yeah.
And so, Maddie, I think I ran off of your question of like, what do we look at, or when do we give up or start over on some of this pasture? But I think there are a lot of like these really hard numbers that have been researched at different universities that if you're 35 to 50% weed competition, that's the time that we start to think about starting over. I've seen they do the flying disc thing, right? Where you draw a line on trademarked frisbee and you throw it out there and you count how many things it points to after 25 and you come up with these compositions of, now I'm at 45% desirable, but X percent forbs and weeds and stuff. I tend to not be that defined when I do that, right? Because I think one of the last things I want people to start doing is going out and tilling or plowing or burning down pasture fields just because they went out and they walked around in their quadrat said this spot's 60% weeds, right? That is such a hard thing to wrap your head around, is looking down and saying, this is my percentage of weeds or desirables in this area, right? Because spatially, pastures are everywhere, right? I mean, you might have all like Gabe was saying about communities. You might look out there and have a half an acre of white clover where they've overgrazed it, and not a blade of grass one, right? So I think it just becomes this. What are your goals? What is your financial situation, right? That's important when we start doing this. And then what are your animal needs? Do you have enough ground to support taking this out of rotation and starting it over? Or are you going to be in a real forage deficit come November, December because you weren't able to use this hay or graze this pasture? So I don't really want to put a number on that. I would say call someone at your conservation district or your extension office and have them come out and help you look at it. And then you start making decisions where to go from there.
Yeah, Justin, I agree with you there. I've been on a couple pasture walks lately where they they had me come out to tell them how to start completely over. And when I got out there, it was definitely not a start over at all. Like it was a minor adjustment. And I've heard from both of them that I keep up with, both of those last two, and they said things are already improving just by a few simple recommendations. So yes, definitely do not start over before you determine what you actually have going on.
One of my favorite anecdote stories that I always tell my farmers when they ask this exact question is, do I just start over? Do I just completely rip it up and put it in something else? There was an animal scientist out of the University of Tennessee. Her name was Dr. Ann Peischel. And what she did is she got this mission to reseed and revitalize the old lava fields of Hawaii, right? And so she brought in this goat, the Kiko breed, put about 100 Kikos on this old lava field, and where there wasn't a blade of grass, supposedly, up to interpretation. She grazes these goats for 3 years, and after 3 years, it is a vital, relushed, grassy area, right? And she claims, I never gave them hay. They just found whatever little bits of pieces that they could find along the way, right? Yeah, they were a little hungry at first, but they figured it out. Right. If she can do that with minimal hay, let's just be honest, you could probably revitalize a pasture. She can do a lava field, you can probably do a pasture. It's just about knowing your animal numbers and supporting those numbers.
I think in my experiences, there's always this like threshold of tolerance that people have for pastures or weeds or hay or whatever it is. Some people keep their cars really, really clean. Other people don't, right? It's just humans as nature. We have a spectrum, and I have some producers that want Churchill Downs, right? They want to spray twice a year. They want to mow 4 times a year. If there's a bare spot, how can I get in there and clean that up? And then you have the complete other end of that spectrum of people that are, hey, they're still putting on weight. Everything looks good. We've got good density. We've got good sod. I don't think we need to change a whole lot, right? And that goes back to understanding your producer and how you guide them, because I get these visits. I go out and they're like, oh, I'm embarrassed to have you out here. This is probably the worst thing you've seen. And it's 100 miles away from the worst thing I've ever seen, right? It's in the top 10% of the best things I've seen. But to them, it's just this atrocity. And figuring out the psychological part of managing people and getting them talked off this ledge because they have a horse nettle or a Canada thistle or something out there. It's not the end of the world. We don't need to start spraying. We don't need to start tilling. We just need to know what we're dealing with.
That's a good segue into this next question. We talk about some management things. So when you guys go out on a farm and you do these pasture walks and these farm visits, what are like easy, quick, or not quick, but easy management things that you see producers just constantly overlooking and they think it's a bigger problem? What are your guys' experiences with that?
I like this question because you're going to get two opposite sides. Justin's going to come from a very plant side. I'm going to come from a very animal side. It's actually one of the biggest things I see when I hit farms is that farmers will tell me, okay, I have these sheep. I've got them on pasture. They're just not kind of eating. I don't know what's going on. What's going on? And I ask them, well, what breed of sheep do you have? And they go, oh, I don't know. I just got them at the auction. Whoa, big red flags here. Big red flags. Where and I take a look, and there's some Suffolks on beautiful lush pasture, or there's some grain-fed sheep that's just never seen a blade of grass in their life, right? And they just don't know how to operate on that pasture. So one of the big things I talk to my farmers is, know your genetics. Good genetics equal good genetics. Know the breed that you're bringing into the equation, because different breeds have very different needs and desires for conditions. And there are also certain breeds are developed in the desert. Some were born in England by the high grasslands of England. So know the breeds, then also know the species of livestock that you are bringing in. So I see a lot of farms where I live in Michigan. It's very swampy. It's a lot of wetlands. And so I will go to a farm. They will show me their wonderful sheep herd. And then I will go and look at their pastures, and it is a swampy wetland. Whoa, that's not going to work. Like we gotta figure out that's probably not the best pasture. It's probably not the best animal for that situation. let's kind of reevaluate that. Other things that I constantly see a lot, and I have to talk to farmers about, and this is the hard one, is that they have 50 cows on 3 acres. And that is a problem because you are never going to get a good pasture when you are overgrazing in that sense. And so I talked to a lot of my producers. I got to have that hard conversation where you probably need to take animals out of this equation. I can always take land out of production, leave it fallow, kind of burn it, set it as a pollinator strip, do whatever I need to do that's not going to be grazing. But what I can't do in the middle of a season is go, oh, shoot, I got 50 cows. I need 50 more acres of grazing. What do I do now? Right. So it's a lot of overgrazing that I see, reducing numbers, and then knowing the species or the breeds that you have. And those are big pieces of advice I can give to a lot of my producers.
So you're exactly right. As you're talking about it, you're thinking of the animal species as, the driver, where I think of the grass species as the driver,
Yeah.
right? I have speciation written down on my list. Um, know your area for the species of grass or forb or legume that you want to plant, right? And that goes back to you can't underestimate knowing your fields, right? If you've got a piece of pasture, get out there and enjoy it. Take the grandkids or the kids for a walk and get outside a little bit and know what's there, because if it's wet, where we're at, we have a lot of like ledgy, shaly stuff, right? You get up on some of these grounds, it gets very dry very quickly. We need stuff that's drought tolerant, right? We can't put orchard grass, or excuse me, alfalfa on a half an inch topsoil that's going to hit bedrock at 6 inches, right? And so
Mhm.
those are the things where we have to kind of start with knowing the area. Then I think we need to talk about our fertility, right? Because that's also going to drive a lot of these species. And that could be fertility through feeding hay in your pasture sometimes when that's acceptable, moving minerals around so that we don't get this spatial distribution of manure in one spot, or encouraging them to kind of get around. Or maybe that is just, in fact, we need to boost it with some synthetic fertilizers and get this thing back in this normal range of production. Knowing your weeds. So I believe that we waste more time and money and chemical trying to treat weeds on our schedule, not theirs, than any other place. And we're talking about management, right? When we think
That's a good
of,
point.
yeah, right, warm seasons and cool seasons, we also have those in weeds, and we have winter annuals and summer annuals. And if we're just out there like, well, heck, I'm done with hay, it's June, I'm going to go out and target dandelion, ship has sailed, right? We have to
Mhm.
know, if we're thinking about Canada thistle or autumn olive or multiflora rose, that's a bud to bloom or a late fall type thing, not when. And I don't want to say management isn't good at any point, right? If you can go out there and do something, but that's not when we're going to see the biggest bang for our buck, is when it suits our schedule, right? And then the last thing is exactly what Gabe said, is livestock numbers aren't static. We can't get in this thing of, up, I'm a 30 cow beef herd. Maybe sometimes you're 40, maybe sometimes you're 20, right? And we have to recognize that last year for us in Pennsylvania, it was very droughty, right? And we didn't have good hay and we didn't have good pasture. Livestock sale numbers were pretty good, so that might be a good time to not go into the winter needing to buy hay, because hay is going to be expensive because everyone needs it, right? We have to understand, 6 months before we get into a situation, do I have enough forage volume for grazing? Do I have enough forage volume for winter feeding? And can I sustain what I have, and make decisions from there?
Maddie, just to add to theirs, those are all fantastic, but just to reiterate, the very first thing that I tell people when we go out is they have to know what's in their soil too. So soil testing, and oftentimes pastures are neglected for soil testing. It's always crop fields. But pastures are definitely neglected for soil testing. So they need to know where they're at. And again, like Justin said, I just want to reiterate that scouting from your vehicle or side by side is fine for that little area, but actually getting out and walking the fields, it will change your opinion fast. We definitely, on our farm, I know I have a pasture it looks great from the road. When you get in it, it's wow. It's, it's definitely needs a system approach. And that's what I always talk about too, is system approaches and plant diversity. I love to see plant diversity in pastures, and that'll help with the soils as well. But definitely soil testing is where I always start with my clients.
So I guess the soil testing and just knowing all those different things, but I know I do more forage and then like look at the actual nutrition analysis with the producers. So when those producers get that soil test results back, or just if they're walking and they're looking at their pastures, when can you spot a deficiency and know when you need to go get help from you guys, whether you're looking at that soil test results or if you're going out and you're walking pastures? When do you see, okay, I have a deficiency, I need to go seek guidance? And I don't know if that question gets my actual thought across, but
So you mentioned forage analysis, right? We can also get an idea of soils off of forage analysis, right? And I'll say this like because I've been doing some of this, if your average cool season perennial grass is a potassium percentage of 1.2 to 2% per dry matter ton, right? That's a pretty standard average on what you would see. If it comes back at a half, it's a pretty good guess that what we're looking at is a low fertility situation, right? Because it can't be in the plant if it's not in the soil. And so that can also be one of those kind of management tools that we can work backwards from. If you're feeling like your hay production is down, but you're taking some samples, right? Nitrogen is directly related to protein, right? There's a whole bunch of other, when did we cut? How did we cut? What are they? But we can kind of start to look at some of those numbers and roughly come back and say, phosphorus looks to be low. Calcium's probably low. Those ratios at 3-to-1 is off a little bit within there. Potassium's not looking great. You said you took it at a early heading stage, but our protein is only 8%, 7%, right? Those are things that we can kind of work through a little bit to help guide back to management with something they may already have.
Yeah, I'd say take the same approach as Justin. It's just really looking at the plant material, take the forage samples, squeezing out nutrition, and hopefully tying that back to a soil test, and then really using that soil test as kind of the just the rock hard evidence, and taking that to the NRCS, to the extension, to conservation districts, or any agronomist really. So yeah, that tends to be my strategy too with farmers. That's really where I need to start getting into the more scientific stuff with the farmer is, all right, we obviously are watching this plant community grow bigger and bigger each year, right? There's got to be a reason for it. And now we've got to start grabbing that evidence from where we can and building you a case.
And I think, Maddie, your question was, um, if we walk out in a field, what specific things kind of key us into we may have a problem, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure that is a much different list for Gabe than it is for me. But
Yeah.
I pretend to know stuff about animals and say like I can tell that we probably start to have a problem when there's 2-inch grass and 18-inch grass, right? When
Yeah.
we're selectively grazing, that may be a management thing. It may also be a speciation thing, right? We may have to address that. When we're starting to see them not want to move out of one spot, undergrazing and overgrazing can both be a big problem, right? So if we walk out in this field and everything's 18, 24 inches tall, we know we could have a problem, right? And that pushes more back to the management of the producer, not necessarily the status of that ground. But that's kind of how we have to look at some of this is walking out, as Gabe mentioned, with these kind of keystone or these really indicator species that we would look at, noticing the animal eating pattern, where they're hanging out, where they're eating, where they're going back to continue this cycle. And from there, we can start kind of poking in some of these management questions. How often do you rotate them? When was the last time you made hay? What was your volume? Those kind of questions can help kind of bring it all back to us.
I'm very much enjoying the conversation that we're having currently, and I think we have time for probably 2 more questions. So, when you start talking to a producer, what are 5 steps or 5 ideas or 5 things that you wish that they take away from your meeting to have good pasture management, to understand what their problem is? Just what are 5 things, or however many things you guys have, 5 or less or 5 or more, I guess, that you wish people would take away from what you have to offer them in terms of information?
Kind of is read this question beforehand, and I was kind of thinking about what are some 5 things that, what are the skills that I want to give my farmers to walk away from, And I think it was a lot of my things I want to give them was a lot of self-reflection almost, is saying like, is this working for me? Right? Because I think that's one of the biggest questions we need to ask a farmer is that what they're is this grazing pattern, this rotation that they're using, is this pasture, is it working for me? Right? Because we spend so much time, run as farmers running around the farm trying to put all these little odds and ends together, right? That the more work we build for ourselves on a day-to-day basis is worse, right? So it's does my pasture work for me? Do my animals work for me? Right? I have a very different question on my farm. I have a draft powered farm, so do my animals work for me? Yes, they do. But do my grazers work for me? Are they effectively mowing my grass? Right? Am I achieving that? Graze 1/3, leave 1/3, trample 1/3. Right? Do my animals fit my farm? You know, um, these are just like these are questions, or I think maybe it's because I come from more of an NRCS world, so that I'm asking these questions for my farmers, and I'm having them ask them to themselves, right? And then this is kind of probably self-defeating question that I have farmers ask a lot, but like I think it's an important one because I work with a lot of new beginning farmers, so people who have been in the game for less than 10 years. And I ask them, I kind of hope they have an answer to this, saying, if it all fails today, what is my plan to get out? Right? How do I get out of this? Right? Where do my sheep go? Where do they sell? Who's going to buy the farm? Who's going to take it over the next day if I have a heart attack today? What is my plan? So there's a lot of contingency planning on my farmers too. And maybe that's more of a business aspect and maybe not the question that you're asking, but I think they do tie into successful grazing management, because if you have 50 sheep and you don't have that answer of what do I do with 50 sheep tomorrow if I have to, that's that's kind of an issue, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Now, the other things that I was going to kind of recommend is Dr. Temple Grandin's 5, animal freedoms: freedom from thirst, freedom of hunger, freedom of pain. Those are also very good knowledge aspects for my farmers to have, because if you're achieving those, you're probably having a good grazing system, right? If your animal is free from hunger, that means it's probably eating, right? If your animal's free from thirst, it's probably drinking good, clean water. It's free from harm, then you probably have it in a good fencing system. You've probably rotated it. You're keeping predators at bay in your fashion. I have a whole conversation about don't kill your predators, actually leave them. But yeah, so I tend to also kind of give my farmers Temple Grandin's 5 animal freedoms. Yeah.
So I have more of the extension approach that Gabe has mentioned of like, we tend to go out on these farms, and when I go out, I've got data and handouts, and when I do presentations, it's data driven and it's handouts. But when I leave there, I really don't care if they remember how much grass they can produce off of 25 pounds of nitrogen, or the photosynthetic rate of stuff in the fall versus the spring, right? They're more of these things that I kind of think of, uh, just do something, right? If you've called me and we've got a problem, just do something to help push us in a direction, right? It doesn't have to be huge. That's the other part of this, right? Is walk before you run, right? There can be a lot of financial burden in this. There can be a really steep learning curve in rotational grazing. No one says that we have to go from conventional grazing to 3 times a day rotating in a month, right? This is a process. With that becomes patience, right? And then my last one is don't be afraid to ask questions, right? I want them to come in. I want them to see that, hey, we've got data to support this. And I want them to kind of take that home and ruminate on, um, this is supported by a lot of years worth of data and research to get us there. But I want them to feel comfortable enough and not overwhelmed enough that they call me back and say, all right, here's what I'm thinking. Can you help me walk through this? Or I just got some soil tests back or some forage results. Would you mind to take a look at them and look and help me kind of guide from here? And so I don't really know. I think that that's the things is the psychological of sometimes you feel such a hole that you don't know where to start to get through some of this. And don't beat yourself up, right? It didn't happen in a day and it won't be fixed in a day. But you have to be able to reach out and take advice.
Mhm. I have this phrase I use a lot with my farmers is proactive rather than prescriptive, right? So if you see a problem happening, right, it's better to be proactive about that problem, get it done, nip it in the bud. Let's figure this out now, rather than 3 months from now. I'll use the case in point of like hoof rot, right? I see a sheep out there, it's kind of limping, it's not doing much, it's just kind of limping, right? And I just leave it as a farmer. 'Cause I don't have time to handle that right now. I gotta go water something else. And then 2 weeks later, that sheep is literally grazing on its hands and knees, right? And that hoof is just a hole, right? So what do you do then, right? It's like you got a whole litany of other things you have to get done. So kind of using that example is if you see something, try to be proactive about that rather than going, it's fine for right now. I'll get to it a different day. I'll do that, I'll do, yeah. Right. No, like get it and handle it now because in 2 months from now, it's going to be a much bigger problem. And, right. So you might as well kind of tackle it now. I see this a lot in the NRCS world, especially with erosion. So I see like a little erosion gully on a pasture. It's nothing. It's just where the water drains from my pasture. 2 months later, I come out and it's 4 foot deep because we live in Michigan sand. It literally just washes away and over in one rainstorm. And all of a sudden, I got a 4 foot gully that's happening, and sheep are just going right under the fence. So proactive rather than prescriptive.
And Maddie, I just want to add, kind of the same thing that Justin was talking about. There's been a lot of meetings that I've been to lately that have, when somebody gets up to present, they only have an hour and a half, and they don't always start with how much of the struggle that they went through. They start with, the majority of the presentation is what's actually working for them. And so afterwards, I'm talking to farmers and they're like, oh my goodness, they're so much above me. Everybody in this room is so much above me. And I said, no, they're not. They all started, they just didn't share their struggles for 30 minutes and what went wrong. They shared what's working so that maybe you can implement some of that. And so I speak with other groups other than agriculture sometimes, and that's what I always, instead of being overwhelmed, start with one thing. Start with change one small thing and see how that is starting to affect your system, and then build upon that and move forward. But I will also, with the soil testing, always start with soil testing. I have to reiterate that because it's so important. Everybody leaves their pastures go with soil testing, or a lot of people do. So that's where I wanted to. And plant diversity. I really, really value plant diversity.
Yeah, these are all great ideas, and I think the conversation today was really, really great. Every episode, I do one thing. I do a fun question at the end, just because I enjoy it, and I think the viewers do too, or the listeners. So my fun question for this episode is, what is your favorite forage? Whether that be because that does something cool, or because you just enjoy it, or you like looking at it, or whatever it is, what's your favorite forage?
I'll probably go really off the radar on this one, but mulberry trees. It's my favorite forage ever. I plant a lot of mulberry trees in little pollinator strips on my farm. And so a lot of people ask me why mulberries. So tree hay is a great forage, but mulberries particularly have incredibly high protein potential to them. There was a study done in Switzerland not too long ago that said mulberry leaves alone have 14 to 34% protein potential within those leaves and a highly digestible fiber at that as well. So we're seeing incredible protein off of these mulberry trees. There's like, whenever I release my animals out into a new pasture, there's usually some sort of mulberry tree shading. And it's the first thing that they want is they want all those little leaves that they can grab, all those little berries that are on the ground. And that is honestly my favorite mulberry. I talk to a lot of producers about planting in what I call vegetative islands in their pasture, and those are being made up of mulberry trees and then usually a pine tree right in the middle. And this provides a little shade area, but then it also provides a good forage for them as well. So, yep, that is my answer. I know it's an unconventional one, but you know what? I'm going to stick with it. I love mulberry trees.
So I think if I had to pick one, I think mine is probably tall fescue, right? And I think that comes from this recently. It's kind of had this struggle of its journey of people really. It's not a good grass anymore. We got to get rid of it. We got to
Yeah,
kill
I
it,
know.
right? And I understand
So
there's
many
a
people.
fescue belt where, yeah, there's a big problem there, but it's this like 6 letter bad word now that,
Mhm.
oh, I'm sorry, I don't mess with fescue. Um, but it's incredibly resilient as a grass. There's a tremendous amount of opportunities to use it in different varieties. Um, it's just kind of unrivaled in parts of our climate here where we are, that you can do so much with it in so many different ways to utilize it. But somehow, and I understand how this happened, but I don't know. I just think it's a cool grass that gets kind of a bad rap, and it's important that we keep remembering that that's a very important part of the speciations that we have options to. And if we start to take that out of everything we have, we're really going to struggle to get things to be productive.
Mine's gonna be simplistic. I love alfalfa because it's beautiful, and I love to take photos. And there's nothing more beautiful than a field of alfalfa. And with that being said, since my simplistic, I'm going to leave. I wrote down a couple things to sum up some of my favorite sayings that I think we should have on shirts or hats or something from this meeting. I know you're going to do a summary, but is this working for me? Never give up. Forages are a patient person's game. Proactive rather than prescriptive. Start with what is not happening, and it can't be in the plant if it's not in the soil. Those are just fun little catchphrases that I gleaned from what everybody was saying.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me into my last thing is there anything that we didn't talk about or any wrap up like Aaron just did? Any other wrap up things that you would like to say before we end today?
Yeah, I'd give out two shout outs to two books that are really good about forages. So one particularly Southern Forages. This is written by a couple different university professors. There's a couple different iterations of some different editions. It's called Southern Forages, but it does apply to a lot of forages within Michigan and Pennsylvania. And the other one is that I love is When Weeds Talk by Jay McCaman. And this is a really interesting book that really talks about you have a plant above, you found the plant, what's going on below? Is there something that's an indication of in the soil? And then it kind of leads you into, do I need a soil test? Do I not? What's going on? So those are two books I would love to give shout outs to if somebody really wants to start getting into their forages a little bit better.
So shamelessly, I will plug the agronomy guide, right? But there's a tremendous amount of research that goes into the weed parts of that specifically, but also just this when do things mature? What areas do they like to grow in? What's the best pH and planting recommendations for things like that? And I think it's incredibly applicable to a lot of the forages and a lot of the things that we're doing. As we've started to talk more about warm summers, right? Now we have sections on Sudan grass and sorghum Sudan and millet and things that can help kind of benefit that part as well.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode and conversation as much as I did. As always, I'd like to thank all of our speakers for coming out and giving us a little bit of their time. If you have any other questions pertaining to forages or pasture management, do not hesitate to reach out to your local livestock educator or visit extension.psu.edu. Other resources and the ones referenced in this episode will be linked in the show notes below. Thank you again for listening, and I will talk to you later.